Hello, and welcome to the Historic New Orleans Collections video series, Following the Beat on the Street, our brief look at the history of New Orleans brass bands and their connections to second lines. I'm Dwayne, THNOC staff and saxophonist for Kings of Brass.
And I'm Danny, the Knox staff and musicologist. We're here in our current exhibition, Dancing in the Streets, Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs of New Orleans. Looking at all these photographs of club parades, I was thinking, you can almost always hear a second line before you see it coming down the street.
Yeah, what would a second line be like without a brass band?
Probably a big communal walk down the street.
Here's what we've discovered. New Orleans brass bands are rooted in tradition and fueled by innovation. They're the lifeblood of second lines. The turn of the 20th century saw the introduction of new instruments, new sounds, and new playing styles that profoundly changed the musical landscape of New Orleans and eventually the world. By the 1910s, these musical innovations, most notably jazz elements, forged the sound, look, and feel of traditional New Orleans brass bands. Over the next 5 decades, brass bands provided the beats for parades and funerals, playing a repertoire that grew to include marches, dirges, hymns, blues, and popular songs of the day.
Changes in instrumentation in the late 19th century affected the evolution of brass bands. In 1893, bandmaster John Philip Sousa commissioned a new tuba-like instrument with a forward-facing bell that was easier to play while marching. The sousaphone would soon become the backbone of every brass band. The 1890s also witnessed the development of new sounds and playing styles. The music was heavily influenced by an influx of previously enslaved African Americans from rural areas, which led to the emergence of a distinctive black brass band style.
As an increased number of black musicians began to learn and play band instruments, a mix of players who could read music and those who played by ear blended syncopation with call and response and some emotive pitch bending. Tying it together was collective improvisation, whereby each player was permitted to embellish parts within the confines of a standard arrangement, creating a dynamic and totally irresistible sound.
The ultimate result was jazz, described by musician and historian Dr. Michael White as a revolutionary new music, characterized by democratic ideals such as free expression, equal participation, and diversity.
Is anyone finer in the state of Carolina? If there is, then you know.
Many early jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong, Kid Ory, and Sidney Bechet played in small ensembles for dancing crowds and cabarets, and also performed in larger brass bands for parades, social events, and funerals. Jazz influenced brass bands, but brass bands also influenced jazz. The streets offered an informal space for budding musicians to experiment with sound and style.
What did this sound like? When we combine an early arrangement with improvised phrasing, syncopation, and military cadence, we get a quintessential early 20th century sound. Let's first listen to the transition from straight to syncopated or ragged feel. Now we'll apply these concepts to a popular ragtime tune. Brass band rhythm sections also began to follow a very important rule. Bass drum on 1 and 3, snare with press rolls and accents on 2 and 4. Let's listen to a few common bass drum patterns.
Throughout the era of segregation, black brass bands took to the streets, playing for church parades, funerals, and anniversary parades for benevolent associations and social aid and pleasure clubs. These processions of church and club members attracted large followings of parade goers, known collectively as the Second Line. The exuberant dancing of the Second Line mirrored the improvisational freedom expressed by musicians on the street during a time when Jim Crow laws denied African Americans social and political equality. Parading through the streets to the sound of a brass band allowed Black New Orleanians to proudly assert their self-worth and lay claim to public spaces that were otherwise strictly regulated by skin color.
Dressed in a standard uniform, black pants, white shirt, black tie, and white cap, bands like the Eureka, Tuxedo, and Onward performed up-tempo hymns, dirges, marches, blues, and popular songs of the day in a marching jazz style. These standards in dress, song, and style became hallmarks of the New Orleans brass band tradition. As jazz spread around the world, New Orleans brass bands remained a uniquely local phenomenon. This vibrant tradition served as a vital space for creative expression and collective participation for Black people in the city.
Keep following the beat on the street to our third video, where the efforts to pass on the tradition leads to a new generation's funkier and faster take on the New Orleans brass band sound.